Yes, welcome back to our YouTube tutorial. This is Mosh Dev Academy, and today I'll be taking you through a guide on how we can add data to the database using PHP and MySQL, or others can call it MySQL, but it is MySQL. So today, before I dive into the real code, maybe I need to just briefly guide you on what is PHP. First of all, PHP, it is a back-end programming language. It is one of the powerful server-side scripting language that I used to build dynamic and interactive web applications. And one of the most common tasks in PHP is interacting with the database. That is how to add, how to retrieve, update, and how to delete the data. So today I'll just guide you on how you can set up your database, how you can connect PHP to MySQL, how you can create an HTML form to collect user data, how are you going to write PHP code to insert data to the database, and this is what we are going to see. Before we can move any further, I have already created a project in HTML, which is this project which you're seeing now. This project, maybe let me first browse it so that you can see. Now this project has been designed using HTML and CSS, as you can see, but my essence today is not to teach HTML and CSS. I want us to look at PHP. So I've designed this form, which is on contact us form. So we are going to use this form so that if the user comes on this site and is submitting the data, we can receive it in the database. So this is what we are going to do today. Now, how do we move? First of all, since now this is HTML project, for us to run a PHP project, we need to copy, or we need to move this project. You can copy this project from here. Now make sure that you have a WAMP installed. For me, my WAMP is up and running, and to confirm that, I can first of all visit my local disk C. I'll look for a folder which is named as WAMP. Then there is another subfolder called www, and this is where you're going to paste your project. Now I'm moving my project from the desktop and I'm taking it to WAMP www. The reason being that you cannot run a PHP project when it is not residing in this directory, more so when you're using WAMP. Now since my project is here, what I'm going to do, maybe not to waste time, let me first rename it. Let me just name it as mobs, yeah, because it will help me when I'll be navigating, and you will see this. Now when I open this project, let me first open it in VS Code. We run a simple command cmd and code space dot. When you run code space dot, you're going to see that my project is opened using VS Code, and you can see that the file that we are having here, they are HTML files, yet right now we want us to run it as a PHP project. So the first task that you do is to first of all rename and change these file extensions from HTML to PHP. So I'll begin with my index, and I'll just simply right click on it. There is that option of renaming, and now we're going to rename it from index.html to index.php. Reason being, we are creating a PHP project, so you cannot leave it as HTML project. Then I'm also going to give this one the same name. I'm going to change its file extension from HTML to PHP. So I'll still go back to my index, and as you can see here, as I was trying to click the navigation, or as I was enabling the navigation here, so that when I'm on index, I'm able to navigate to my contact. You can see that it still has contact.html. Now since you have changed this, it's no longer contacts.html. Therefore, that implies that I should also change this one from contact.html to contact.php. Still, even when I go to index, I have to change this. Instead of, let's say, my home, as you can see here, I'm going to have it as my index.html, so that I'm able to navigate, rather .php, so that I'm able to navigate from one page to the other. So if you have linked all these other links here that you have, for example, you have maybe a fax.php, about.php, you can as well go ahead to add all those links here. So whenever you make any change to your file extensions, please make sure you can go to your navigation and you update the same. So we have this, and right now if we want to run our project as a PHP project, we do not use this default option of simply coming here and you right click, then you browse. What we do for us to run a PHP project, you always start your WAMP. To start your WAMP, you simply go to the search and you look for WAMP. Yeah, we are looking for WAMP. So since for us we are using this old version, it is this in color. So we shall start our WAMP, and of course it will ask us that do you want to make change. We shall accept, and you're going to see that when you navigate down here, the icon for WAMP will show here, and when you click on it, it will show other options which are available. In most cases, make sure that all the services are running. And how do you confirm that the services are running? You can simply just come here and you see that when you start all the services, everything is up and running. So right now we want to first run a PHP project. Where do we go? You simply just navigate to this local host. It will automatically open the default browser of your choice depending on what you're using. So once you click there, you navigate down, and here there is this section of your project. So if you successfully brought or copied your project from wherever it was, mine was on the desktop, I copied it and I brought it to a folder through the WAMP, then www, that's where we drop our project. Now mine was BBC Day project, but I had to rename it to MOBS just for easy navigation, as you're going to see. And since my project is here, when I come back here and I check amongst the project that it is listing, I can see that I can only see one project, because if we are to go back and we confirm, you can see that we only have a single project, which is MOBS. The rest is index, and please do not delete this file. Just drop whatever I want to drop here and don't make any change to the www folder. Whatever you find there, please do not delete. Leave everything as default the way I've brought this one here. Now, when we come back to the project, still I was trying to show you how we browse a PHP project. You're going to simply click on this folder. Once you click on it, by default, it is going to open your project here. Now, some of you at your end, if you have not created an index page, if amongst all the files that you have in your project, we do not have any file which is named as index, you will not see something like this. Rather, you're going to see some of the files that are listed. For example, if you have home.html or .php, we shall have home.php, about.php, and all that. So for you to achieve this, make sure that in your project, the first page that you want the user to visit or to see as he's navigating your project, you should always name it as index.php. Yes, not home.php. Name it as index.php, so that by default, when you're browsing your PHP project, you're able to see or to navigate to your home or to your index page, which will come by default. So this is what we have. So you have successfully managed to navigate or to run your PHP project. So right now our focus is not going to be on the index, but rather it's going to be on contact.php. Now you can simply see that whenever I click on this, when you look closely to this route here, when you look up here, you can see that I'm inside the MOBS and I'm running a contact.php. So still, if I want to navigate back to index, if I don't use the navigation links, I can as well just click here that I want to go back to index.php. Once I run like this, it will take me back, but this one, it does not give a best user experience. That's why we always provide these navigation links, because the users might not know how you named your files. That's why here when I try to click on home, rather contact, I'm able to navigate back to home, not by just coming to this URL, but I can simply just click on this navigation link and it will take me back to the index.php. So this is what we have. Now, having successfully run our PHP project, so now our focus should go back to now how do we link PHP to our HTML so that we can see the data in the database. So the first task that we do is to create our PHP file that will enable us to create a connection between your database and your project. Remember, the data that you want to see on this contact page, we want to receive that data in our database. Therefore, between the project and the database, there must be a communication or a link, something that is going to help you to link your data to the database. That's why now we need to create that file. And the file that I'm going to create, you can simply just come here and you click on this first option. It helps you to create a new file, and we're going to name this file maybe we can actually name it connect.php. Yeah, we are trying to separate this logic. However much we can write everything on the same file, but it is always better to separate concerns. For example, if I want to know whether if the communication is not successful, I can easily know that, okay, when I visit my connect.php, that's where I linked up my code. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to write the codes that can help me to create that communication. How can I do this? So what we do first is, there are different ways how we can achieve this, but I'm going to teach you the most recommended way of creating a communication between your database and your project. So you need to define PHP syntax, and this is the PHP syntax that we shall define. So we shall just write this as PHP, okay, then you close it, and every code that we want to see as a PHP code should be written in between this opening tag of PHP and the closing tag. Whatever I write outside these tags will not be treated as a PHP code. Therefore, everything that we want to see as a PHP code should be written in between these syntaxes. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to declare some variables so that they can store some values for me. For instance, I need to declare a variable which is server side. So I need to declare a variable which is maybe server name, and I'm going to name it, okay, this is suggesting for me, let me first disable the internet. So I'm going to declare a first variable as server name. Then I need another variable as a username. Then I'll need another variable as a password. Yes, I need another variable as password. Then I need the last variable as a DB name. So now these are the variables that I've declared, and I have to pass the values that are going to be occupying these variables. And the first value here, we shall have localhost. So our server name always is going to be localhost, and don't forget to terminate. In PHP, we must always terminate. So always the server side is localhost. Reason being, when we download and install our WAMP, so it provides a server which can be locally hosted on our machine. So the server that we are using, we access it through its localhost, and the username is always root by default. Yes. So the password is always empty, but don't leave this one as empty. Just add this string syntax. When you see those single quotes or double quotes, they represent a data type which is a string. And the DB name, as of now, we are going to first leave it empty until we define it in the database. Remember, we have to go and we define our database. The DB represents the database name, so we need to define this in the database. So right now I'm going to first leave it as empty. So here we have just defined these variables and we have passed their values. So after doing this, what we need to do next is to create what we call a connection. So we have all along we have been just defining variables, but we haven't yet created a connection, a communicator between your database and the project. So to create this, you need to declare another variable which we can name it as con. So after creating the variable, we need to create, let's say, this line which is new, and we ask MySQL. Yeah, there's what to call MySQL. That MySQL, don't mistaken this as one. This is I. It is MySQL. Yeah, MySQL. This. Now in between here, this is where you're going to pass these variables that you have been defining, and make sure you pass them in the order we have listed them. If we have begun with the server name, make sure that the server name, actually you can always just copy this and then you paste here. We first begin with the server name, then what came next was the username. Then from the username, what else did we define? We defined the password. Yes. After defining the password, what came next was the DB name. So after doing this, of course, you're going either to terminate, or we can also add these curly braces, because we shall check later to see whether the connection has been successful or not. Now, you're going to realize that some developers out there, they might not, instead of passing this, the developer might choose to go by this option by simply just copying this and is bringing it here, because ideally this is represented by this. So when I import, or when I get this variable, like the way I'm having it here, and I pass it here, I'm simply representing the local host. So instead of having, let's say, variable username, rather server name, username, password, and the DB name, some of the developers might directly pass the values within here. But it's not recommended, because it is always good to use the object-oriented approach, where you define, because at any time you might need to change, let's say that you might need to make some updates, more so when it will come to the hosting. When you're hosting, you might be forced to change to the different hosting platform that you are using. That's why you're going to use this option, that always it's better to always go by this option of, first of all, defining the variable names, and then you pass them as variable names, but in this case they are representing their actual values, because these variable names are storing these values. Then after doing this, you can first of all check to see whether the connection is successful or not. For instance, you can use the if statement, then you're like if, yes. So you check to see if con equal to true. So you're checking to see whether the connection has been successful. Then you can now come here and you echo. So you might want to echo anything. So I might echo maybe successfully connected. Yeah, I can echo this, successfully connected. Then I terminate. Then I can have the else, because we are using the if else. So we are checking to see whether the first if has been successful or no or not. So we check again. So if this is not successful, we shall echo failed to connect. Yes, failed to connect. So we shall check to see whether it is successful or not. So we shall say failed to connect. So instead of passing commas here, they should be termination. We should terminate, not passing commas. Yes, here we terminate. We don't pass commas, we terminate. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we had to terminate here. We had to terminate here, not to pass these. We had to terminate here, yes, and also we had to terminate here. So what we had to do was to declare this line of statement, as you can see. Then you terminate. Then you come here to check to see whether the connection has been successful or not. So if the connection was successful, we would have this echo message of connected successfully, or else we shall see this error message of failed to connect. So we can see whether we have successfully connected to our database or not. So after doing this, what we do next is to first check this line to see whether everything is successful. How do we check? We can go back to our project. Now we can route to our connect.php to first of all see whether we have been successful. You know, it is always important to check one by one. You can see that we have successfully connected to our database, but you can see that we don't have a database name here. If we try to pass our database name as mobsdb, if we go back and we check again, you're going to see that we shall see that echo error message telling us that there is that unknown database database name. So the reason as why we are saying this, it's because we are trying to check whether the database has been successfully connected to it or not. And since we have not yet created this database, that's why we are seeing that on line 8 they are popping up this error message that the DB name cannot be recognized, or unknown DB name. So what we need to do next is to create a DB for that. And how to create it, you still go back to this, look for your WAMP, and then look for PHP my admin. phpMyAdmin, this is where we create our databases from. Now the same database that you're passing here should be the same database that you're going to pass within this. So you copy the other name and then you paste it here. Then you can click on create. So we have created our database here, and if we try to first navigate back and we check, you can see that that error has gone. Reason being, we have managed to create our database in the WAMP, in the admin side. So therefore both the project and the database, they are in communication. So meaning anything that you want to pass within your database can be accepted. Reason being, you have successfully connected to your database. So having created this, now we need to create another code that is going to help us insert data to the database. We are going to see how do we now insert data to the database. Now, since we have created a file connect.php, we need to create another file as insert.php that will help us to insert data to the database. So I'm going to create another file as insert.php. So I'm going to define all my codes that are going to help me insert data from the other form to the database. But before I do this, I need to first of all declare the syntax for the PHP. So this is how you declare the syntax for the PHP. And everything that we want to write as a PHP code should be defined within this syntax, the opening and the closing. So now, for us to write the code, there is nothing that you're going to add to your database without communicating with the connect.php, because this connect.php ideally is the one which has the connection or something that is going to connect with the database. So at any point, whenever you want to interact with your database, you need to first of all require. So there are two options. You can use require or require once. The choice is yours, but I always emphasize we go with require and we connect to PHP. So this line of statement is simply, it's like me importing. It's like an import statement. I want to import this line of code onto this insert.php so that I'm able to communicate with my database, because you cannot add data to the database without this connection. So whenever I want to import anything, whenever I want to import the other code from one PHP file to the other, we use this function of require. There is that option of require once, which is a built-in function, or we can just go by require. So once you bring this line of code, it is equivalent to someone who has just simply copied every line of code here. You copy everything the way we have it here, and you replace it with this. But now, this is not recommended to simply copy and paste here. It is always important to learn that in programming, there is that concept of inheritance, where you can simply just inherit everything from one file to the other through just writing a simple line of code, which is equivalent to the import. So by importing this, I've managed to bring the other connect, and I'm able to connect to my database. Once I have this, now I'm going to write PHP code that is going to pick my data from the form. When we go back to our project, this is the form that we are going to use. So this form, we need to write code that is going to get or pick the data, that is going to receive data from this form. Then we process it with PHP, then we save it in the database. So how to achieve that? Let me first visit back my contact.html. Rather, this contact.php, it has got what we call a form. We have our form here, as you can see. We have a form, and now this form is the one that we are going to use to get the data which is on this form, and we can save it in the database. So going back to the project, we have these input fields, which we have the name, we have email, and we have the message. And when we go back to our contact.php, those input fields are lying on this form. So as you have this input field, for you to interact with your PHP, what you need to do is to first of all use what we call a property named as name. There is a property, we have different properties. For example, we have a type property, we have a name property, and we have the ID property. From the background of JavaScript, all along we have been using the ID. Now, right now, since we are using PHP, we are going to use the name property. Now, to use the name property, you pass the same name that you would love to have here. For example, this is name. I can name this one as full name. Yes. So now, since my variable name, since my field name is named as name, if I use name, you might get lost. Let me just use full name so that you would now understand the difference, so that in the future you don't just cram that it's name. It can be something else. You might be picking first name, therefore your name here, the name parameter you pass here should be first name. Since I want to pick the full name, I'll just simply pick the full name. So I'll do the same with the rest of the input fields. So I'll just pick this one as email. And lastly, I'll pick my text area as message. So now, without passing this is message. Without passing this, you cannot interact with your PHP. So the line, the property that can help us connect with PHP is this line, the name property. In the name property, you pass the same name that you're going to fetch within your insert, because this form to communicate with your PHP, we need this property. Now, having defined our name properties here, we need now to go back to our PHP and we write the code that is going to help us get data from the form. So if I pass maybe here some comment, it is always good to comment. Let me say maybe this is get data, yeah? Get data from the form. We need to get data from the form. We are getting data from the form using these lines of statement. Now, for us to pick data, so that now if the user is entering anything here and is submitting, we are able to pick that data. We need to first of all define variables. Now, these variables are going to help us pick data from the form. So we shall first of all define the first variable as full name. Yes, we can define our first variable as full name. And then we can define another variable basing on our form fields. We have name, we have email, and then we have the message. So our second variable is going to be email. Yes, then the other variable is going to be message. We are going to pass a message here. Then now from this, what we are going to do next is, there are different methods that we can use to when we are working with PHP. For example, we have the post method, we have the get method, we have the put method, and the delete method. Now, since right now we want to perform a post, we want to add data to the database. Therefore, for us to achieve this, we need to go here and we use what we call a post method. So once you use an underscore and then you put a dollar sign, you can see that it will list some of the available options. For example, we have the get method, we have the post method, we have the request method, the server method, the session method, and all other methods that are listed here. But for us, we want to use the post method. So this is the syntax that we are using. We use the post and use the normal square brackets, then a single brace, rather single quotes, and then we close. And now, once you declare this line of statement, what you pass in between here should be the same name that you have passed in your name property for that particular field. For example, I'm picking a field which is name. So for me to pick this, I need to come and I copy the same name I've passed here. I'll just simply paste it here to avoid any syntax error that might arise. So if you don't want to mess up, make sure you simply go to your form, pick whatever name that you have passed as your name property, and then you simply paste. I can do the same for the rest. I can simply just copy this line of code and I keep on pasting here and then here. So I'll need just to adjust, and I make an adjustment amongst this, because now with email we are not picking full name, but rather we are picking email, and lastly this is not going to be full name, it will be message. So you can see that for you to interact with PHP, you need first of all to declare the name property within your form. After declaring the name property, when you go back to your PHP, there are different functions that we use. Since we are getting data from the form and we want to post it in the database, we shall use a post method. There are several methods that we can use, but for us we are using a post method. So therefore, right now we have declared variables and we have attached a method that is going to help us pick data from the form. So what is left is to create a SQL statement. A SQL statement is like SQL statement that is going to help us add data to the database. Yeah, that SQL statement that is going to help us add data to the database. And that SQL statement we can write, for example, we can declare a variable which is SQL, then we use what we call the insert function. But before you use the insert function, you have to pass these two double quotations, and in between the double quotation, that's where we write our code. For example, we can use insert, yes, insert into. Now you're inserting into, and what you pass here should be the table name that you have created in your database. Remember, right now we haven't yet created a table that we are going to pass here. So the first thing we need to do now is to go and we create a table in the database, so that now whatever data that is coming from the form can be saved in the table that we have created in the database. So the first step we can do before we write this SQL statement is to go back to our PHP MyAdmin, and then within, remember you have created just a database, we haven't yet created a table. So you can see that once you create a database, it will ask you that can you please pass on a table name that you want to have. For example, I must pass my table as a student. Yeah. So remember, when you are creating this, there are some rules that we follow. So table names should be in singular, not plural, though in some cases we shall see, for example, in advanced development, that is Laravel, they automatically change the table names to plural. But for now, let us just leave it as a student. And now they are asking you the number of fields. Going back to our database, rather to our project, we have to ask ourselves, how many fields are we picking? There are 1, 2, and there are 3. So meaning here, the field that we need, there should be 3, and then you enter. Once you enter, they'll ask you to name those different fields. For example, it is always important that the names that you pass here in your form as you're picking your data, or in your name property, should be the same names that you're passing in the database, so that you can avoid some errors that might come along. So me, what I always do is to come and I pick the same name I passed here as my first name, then I paste it here. Yes, then I go back and I pick another one as email, so that even if I make a mistake in my spelling, I'll just proceed with the same mistake and it won't be an error within my code. Then the last project, the last name property I'm picking is a message. Then from this, you have to specify the data type. Now, the data type, from your background programming knowledge, you know very well that we have integers, we have strings, we have double, we have decimals, we have short, we have long. But within this, there are other different databases, rather data types that we did not cover, but you're seeing them for the first time. For example, we have the varchar, we have the text, we have the date, we have the numeric. But I always emphasize to choose the varchar, reason being that when you choose this option of varchar, it can accommodate both the data types or the data type. For example, if it's a string, it will treat it as a string. If it's a number, so varchar can accommodate both the values and the character. That's why we always go by that, unless you're very sure that the data that you're picking is an integer. For example, if you're dealing with price, for example, we are creating a table and it has, let's say, fields like a price. So if you have something like that, it is always important to select the right. But if you're not sure of which data that the user might feed within your table, always go with the varchar. Then you have to specify the length. The length is like how many characters will your field accommodate. Yeah, now basing on what you think, for example, if it's name, you can go by 100 characters. Don't overestimate and don't underestimate, because when you overestimate, you create what we call redundancy in your database, which might slow down your machine, rather your project, when it's executing. Of course, right now we are beginners, we might not understand that, but just know it's not always don't always give a lot of space. So we shall use just 100, 100, 100, and then we shall save. Now, in cases where maybe you had given 3 fields, but you realize that on your form they have added another field, for example, let's say phone number. Instead of email, we have, let's say, name, email, message, and phone number. How do you add that other field without disrupting or deleting your table? You can see that there is this option down here, yes, where they are asking you to add more other field. So you can specify if you need one field, you just leave one. If you need two more other fields, you use two. So they even ask you, do you need it at the end of the table, at the beginning of the table, or after some field? So you can specify all these things here and you click on go. But right now, since I only have one field, which is whether I have only 3 fields, I will not add that. But in cases where they have asked you to add more other table, rather table field, you can just use this option. So right now we have our table within the database and it has got the fields. So when we go back to our HTML, rather to our PHP, so after this SQL statement, we wanted to insert data, but this data does not go to the database. It goes to the table, and the table is within the database. And how did we communicate with the database? Through this line of what? This line of code. So we shall insert into, what's our database name? Our database name was mobs, but rather I'm asking what is for that. The table name is student. Therefore, we shall have student here. Yes. Then we are saying insert into student, which is the table. Now, within the table, you must declare the fields. Yeah. So here we are passing the table, which is insert into, and the table is student. And now, what are the fields within our table? We have full name, we have email, and the message. Therefore, we are going to say we have full name here. Yes, comma. We have the email, and then lastly we have the message. So we have the message, and after there you pass values. We are still writing the same SQL statement. So we have created this, and now we have to pass the values. What came first? These are the field names within our table. When you look at our table, these are the fields that we are pointing at. Now we have to pick the actual values, and these actual values are represented by these variables that we passed above here. So when you're picking this, note that when we are getting the data from our variables, we must recall which data type we are using. Since right now when you look at the name, it is going to be treated as a string. So when you're passing your values here, you might represent, let's say the name is going to be string, and then you pass this one as a string. How do you represent a string? By adding single quotes. But if you're very sure that the data you're going to pick is a number, for example, if my email was a number, I would just simply pass it like this without adding what? Without adding the quotations. But since I know that the email is treated as a string, I'll need to add what? The quotation is. So I'm going to add the quotation is there because an email is a string. Then lastly, I'll also pick a variable for the message, and it's also a string. So this line of statement does not automatically add our data to the database, but it is the SQL statement that can be used to add our data to the database. So we need to write another line which would perform the actual insertion of data to the database, but we are going to write this one as an if statement so that we can check to see. We write the if, then we check. We use the con. Where are we picking the con? Going back to our connect.php, it is the con that is getting the data from it's this con, the variable, which has that statement that connects to our database. So for us to be able to add the data to the database, we need to communicate with this con. That's why I'm having this con, and I'm checking it to see whether the con can use what we call a query. A query is a function that can be used to interact. Whenever you want to interact with your database, you use a query. Either to add the data to the database, we shall use a built-in function for PHP, which is a query, or when we want to retrieve. So right now we want to add. So we are going to check if the con, and the con is picking what? It is picking the SQL, which is the SQL statement that is adding our data to the database. And then we shall check to see if it is true. Yeah, if it is true. So we are checking to see if this con is true, if this line of code has successfully added our data to the database. So we shall pass a message using the echo, that data has been sent successfully. Data sent successfully. So this is if the data has been successfully sent. Else, so we shall use the if else to check to see whether if data is not successfully added. So if the data is not successfully added, we shall echo a statement of, let's say, failed to add data. So we shall have that code, failed to add data. So if everything is okay and you really prayed, you're going to see that that this code is going to work. So we can first check to see whether everything is okay. But before we can check, we have to first make some changes in our contact, in our form. Yeah, remember, before you can check to see whether everything is okay, we have to visit back our form. There are two things that we have to do. One, we need to add what we call action. Yeah, we need to add action, and then lastly, we need to add what we call a method. There are two things that you do. Either you need action, and the method is always a post because you want to perform a post request. Yeah, and action is the name of the file that where the line of code that you want to execute a line. For example, right now my lines of code for PHP that are going to perform that insertion of data to the database are on this insert.php. Therefore, my action is going to happen on insert. Yes, insert.php. Without this line of statement, we shall not be able to process our data since our codes are on separate files. So we need to connect them together so that the data can go to the database. So right now we can check if everything is okay. It has to work. For example, let me save maybe Mosh, and the email is mosh at gmail.com. So we are simply just testing to see, and we are saying hello. Simply hello, and then we can click on send. You can see that we have received a successful message that successfully connected and data has been sent successfully. So we can check to see in our database by clicking on the table, and you can see that we have the message, we have the data, as you can see on this row. The data that we have picked from the form here has been successfully saved in the database. So going back to wrap up what we have done, the first step was to create, to get our project, and we add it to www. Since it was an HTML project, we had to change the file extension from HTML to PHP. After that, what we did next was to first of all create a connect.php. This is so important because it's the one which establishes a communication between your project and the database. Then from there, we created this form, which is the insert.php. We had to first of all import the data, whatever data was on the connect.php. We use this line of code to import because we need a connection with the database so that we can add the data in the database. Then from there, we created variables that are picking data from the form. We used this SQL statement here. Then we checked to see whether data has been successfully sent to the database or not. And if everything is okay, you saw that we are able to run and our data is seen in the database. So for now, we have this. I'll have another video where I'll be explaining now how do we retrieve data from the database, how to retrieve data from the database. So for now, this is what we have covered, and have the best of all. So as a software developer, it is always good to keep on practicing, keep coding. Thank you.